Folks, welcome back. I usually bring you the best of the best, and today actually is not an exception. I'm talking to my friend James Lindsay, who's been on the program before. First of all, James Lindsay, welcome back.
Thank you, Eric.
And if anybody wants a primer on who you are, they can watch the Socrates in the Studio conversation that I did with you at the ARC conference in London. That's what's that, 2 months ago, something like 2 months ago now. But you've been on the program before, but that to me was sort of a summation of kind of who you are and what you think about and what you do. How do we describe you, James Lindsay? I always ask people, like, you're an author. Okay, most people come on the show are an author, so that tells us nothing. You're a professional troublemaker. That's a good way of putting it. You have talked a lot about cultural Marxism in the academy. You have yourself been in the academy. So you talk a lot about cultural Marxism, and you've helped everyone to understand what wokeism is, how DEI, intersectionality, cultural Marxism, add up to this world in which we talk about the woke left. Recently, you have been talking, you spoke to me privately about it, and then you've been speaking publicly about it quite a bit, but I want you to talk about it today, about something you call the woke right, which most people, if they're not really paying attention, which is most of us, that's me included, just think, what, wait, what? What do you mean? It's like the communist fascists. I'm confused. And so you have also gotten into some controversy recently, which I'd love you to talk about, with some folks that I think of as allies in the larger cause for the country and the culture about this concept of the woke right. So I wanted you today to help us understand what you mean by it, and also help us understand, maybe out of the gate, who has attacked you for talking about some of this stuff, like people that we would know.
Gosh, I think almost everybody has attacked me at this point. Not quite everybody. Some people have not, I guess. But let's see. We could do an awful long list. The thing is, a lot of the people who are prominent within this set of factions, I think is the best way to put it, because it's not one belief, right? A lot of people get woke wrong. They think it's a set of beliefs. A lot of people do this with science. They think that science is a set of conclusions. Science tells us there's a great red spot on Jupiter, but it's not a set of conclusions or a set of beliefs. It is a way of thinking and approaching ideas. And so, a lot of the people in the different factions of what I've been labeling woke right don't necessarily agree with one another on everything. Not a lot of them are well known, but for example, I think one of my primary antagonists is a character that operates at the Blaze, which was formerly owned and controlled by Glenn Beck, but no longer since he retired. And that character's name is R.N. McIntyre. I think he is a very clear articulation of what I'm talking about. So,
Okay, now let me just say, this is why I find this fascinating, because Orrin McIntyre has been on this program many times over the last 3 years, I think, and he has never said anything that I haven't agreed with. He's been a great advocate of stuff that I believe in. So on the positions, he seems to be correct. So what you're talking about, I believe, is because you just said it about with science, right? In other words,
mhm.
it's about a way of seeing. It's not about what you see. So it we've been fooled because most of the woke left kind of lines up with certain things, and then those of us who are conservative would line up in a different area. But you're saying that there are people who may line up with us in many things, but something about their approach uh, partakes of the same thing that you've seen in the woke left. So what is it about? So let's talk about that. In other words, what is
Yeah.
it when you
Let's
talk
start with
woke
the
right?
left.
What does that mean? What are these principles of what you're calling wokeism that you've seen on both sides? What are the principles?
Yeah, let's start with the left because people are going to be able to understand it more
Yeah.
clearly. So the left says a lot of things, and I mean leftists, I mean Marxists. They say a lot of things that generally speaking, liberals or even depending Christians will recognize as true. There's a lot of inequality in society, for example. This is often a true statement. In fact, it's just a true statement. Some people have a lot of concern about that, right? So they might say, look, whatever proportion of people in this particular field of work that's prestigious are white, and this other smaller proportion are black. And if we look at that compared to, the total populations, we don't have parity. There are proportionally more white people than black people working in, say, high tech fields or in government or whatever it happens to be, something prestigious. So a lot of people will see those facts. They will say those are true facts. That is an accurate statistical representation of what's happening. And then they'll say, well, don't you think that maybe means there's discrimination there? And then you have this kind of reasonable debate. Well, is it caused by discrimination or not? Well, the leftist or the woke view is that discrimination is hidden and intrinsic and systemic, so that you may not be able to find a single person who actually discriminates, who actually holds racial animus, who actually prefers not to hire black people over white people. You can't find a single person, but it must be hidden somewhere. Maybe it's the way we use language. Maybe it's the way we teach our kids. Therefore, we have to seize control of the entire system and how it approaches. We need our education to be more culturally responsive so that it can reach the black people differently because it's intrinsically racist. This is what I mean by a way of seeing that the racism must be hidden somewhere within the system, and it has oppressed a group of people even though you can't necessarily find a single person doing the oppression. So the Marxist can come along and say a lot of true things about society. They can say a lot of things that morally resonate with not Marxist liberals, and they can get those people to carry water for this radical vision that society was built on racism, that hides its racism very well, but that the racism is the fundamental organizational principle of the society. That's critical race theory, which we all recognize as a woke theory on the left. The
Okay, and
same,
let me
sure.
say, just interrupt to clarify or annotate. So the idea is that the people on the woke left will say everybody and everything is racist and there's an inequality because of it. And then we will say, well, look, I know I'm not a racist, and I don't know anyone who is a racist. And if I did, I would condemn them and ostracize them because that's despicable. And they would say, doesn't matter. Racism is everywhere. And you go, where? And they do, it just is. And they're
Yes,
basically saying, kind of like Groucho Marx, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? In other words, your
yeah,
own eyes tell you there's no such thing. They're telling you, ignore what you see and feel and what, just take our word for it. We're right. There's racism everywhere. And they kind of just bully people into accepting this and into going along with their plans. They say, just trust us. We're going to burn everything down and it's going to be better.
that's right.
And we don't believe them. We know that they're wrong. But so that makes sense on the left. So keep
So there's
going.
a name for that, which is
Yes.
called, in this case, with race, it's racial consciousness or a critical race consciousness, if we put it in the terms of critical race theory. And what they would say when you say, where is the racism? I know I'm not racist, is they say, Eric Metaxas, you're complicit in the system because you refuse to recognize it. So they have a true consciousness in their view of how racism works, and you have a false consciousness. So what I'm arguing is a very simple proposition that woke means having a critical consciousness, that you understand that there is a system of power designed to oppress a particular group to the benefit of a different group, and the group that benefits willfully cannot see it and is therefore complicit in the continuance of that
Okay.
oppression.
And ladies and gentlemen, if this sounds demonically confusing, that's because it is.
That's
Uh,
right.
but okay, so keep going. We've just got 60 seconds. Can you say quickly how the right partakes of this as well?
Exactly the same way. They construe that there is a system of power that's built up. Maybe it's by Jews, maybe it's by the post war liberal consensus, maybe it's by liberal society at large, to exclude true conservatism from the halls of political power. So they can say very true things, but the motivation that they have coming is that they have a true consciousness of what's really going on. They say, we know what time it is. No one else does. They have a true consciousness, and everybody else who's going along with the liberal status quo, unfortunately, has a false consciousness and therefore has no capacity to understand the problem, thus, no capacity to stand in positions of communication or power.
Okay, so I'm trying to pull out like the principles of what you just said. Part of it is this kind of like we're the Gnostic initiated people that we know actually what's going on, and nobody else sees what we see. And there's this hidden system, and what? Yeah, typically it's like it's the Jews or something. When we come back, folks, we will explore this further. This is unfortunately extremely important. Stay tuned. Welcome back, talking to James Lindsay. Okay, James, you've coined the term woke right, and I'm trying to sort of tease out what this is so everyone can really understand what you're talking about it, because it's been unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, controversial. So when you talk about people on the right, conservatives, who partake of these elements of wokery, let's get specific. Let's go back. You just said they say, kind of like the leftists, the woke leftists, they say, oh, there's this hidden system of people running everything. So the leftists would say it's white men in power oppressing everyone besides themselves. And then if you say, well, I don't know any white men who would ever want to do that. In fact, I'm a white man and I despise that. What are you talking about? They go, well, you're just part of it. You don't understand. You don't see. Okay. So the conservative people who you say partake of these woke principles, they are similarly saying that there's kind of a hidden group oppressing the rest of us or the rest of the world. So who has said that? And how have they said that?
Well, there's a variety of ways, but first let me distinguish. They don't identify as conservative. They identify as right wing. And they are being very clear on social media recently that they are, and I quote in all caps, we are not conservative. They are very clear that they are right wing, that they see conservatism as a perennially losing proposition. And so being radically right wing is actually a necessary corrective. The argument that they tend to make, whether it's the Jews or this thing called the post-war liberal consensus, is that the entire socio-political order has been arranged so that radical right-wingers, which can include fascists, which can include Nazis, which can include racialists, as the word used to be, racist is the word today, which can include just very hardline, I don't think conservatives are the right word, right wingers and authoritarians, that these people have been systematically excluded by literally what they refer to as liberals and neocons, who they see as two sides of the same coin. There's this
Okay,
false politics.
now hang on a second. So, because I want clarity here. It sounds like these are people who are basically fascists. In other words, the tribal identity is good. I'm white. I'm German. Jews bad. German, Aryan, white, good. It's a tribal identity. So
Mhm.
that's part of what you're talking about here.
Intrinsically collectivist, intrinsically identity based. Yes.
Okay, so this is why, if you put Hitler versus Stalin, they are both, in my mind, evil, like really evil. They pretend to be on opposite sides of things, but they're both evil. They're both totalitarian statists who don't believe in God, who don't believe in the sanctity of the individual, don't believe in freedom, but they appear to be opposites. In fact, mostly they are exactly the same. One theoretically is far right, the other theoretically is far left. It's irrelevant. They're the enemies of truth and liberty, the sanctity of life, and whatever it is. So that is a little bit helpful. But when you talk
So
about this,
hold on, I'll break in real quick for
go ahead.
clarity. The Stalin or the Marxists characterize their project as seeing oppression as systematically organizing the world, and they are falsely claiming that they'll get rid of it, when in reality they're just going to take it over. The fascists are responding by saying that that hierarchical order of oppression is what kept society stable, and we've been robbed of it. So that's the only difference between them. The Marxists say we're going to get rid of hierarchical oppression, and the fascists say hierarchical oppression is what made it work. We need to go back to it. But they're both totalitarian, they're both evil, and they're both using this demonic critical consciousness logic.
Okay, now I'm going to challenge you again to give me names. Don't bring up Orrin McIntyre because he's not a household name. Who else has partaken of this?
Well, Tucker Carlson, he's a household name. He's partaken of this. Candace Owens has taken of this. She is a household name within conservative circles, at least. Um, they are both in that camp rather firmly. It's hard to stay within household names because it's hard to know who's a household name
Well,
at this point.
but I
But
mean, when you bring up Tucker Carlson,
mhm.
um, or actually before we get to him or to Candace Owens, who has been attacking you? Give us some other names because I'd just love to get some sense of what we're talking about.
Well, these are not famous people in the big picture, but largely the people who've been attacking me are either very prominent influencers, primarily on social media, many of whom are just kind of anonymous with weird fake names, like it's Homath. That would be one account that goes after me rather a lot. He's a Ken Wilber integralist and a not which is not a Catholic integralist. It is a Hermetic wizardry thing, and it's a total
But I
cult.
mean,
But he
most
goes after
people
me
like me would
vigorously
just dismiss this as fringe. And why are you even reacting to it? Why do you care what these lunatics say on the internet? I mean,
because they
more
control
prominent
elite MAGA.
people.
They
Well,
control elite MAGA.
but keep giving me names. I mean, you said
Okay, so
Tucker and
yeah,
Candace are
so
huge names. Who else?
well, within the Christian nationalist circle, I get kind of this relentless attack, although I've blocked most of them, so it's less from the two non-related wolves, Stephen Wolfe, who wrote the book The Case for Christian Nationalism, and William Wolfe, who is kind of a political operative, who is the executive director of the Center for Baptist Leadership, which is connected to the American Reformer, which is the magazine that I hoaxed with the Communist Manifesto.
Okay.
The operators behind both the American Reformer and its sister organization, New Founding, which would include Nate Fisher and Joshua Abbatoy, go after me quite a lot. The kind of
Okay, hang on a
Ogden,
second.
Utah Christian
Hang on. We got plenty
nationalists.
more coming up. Hang on. We got folks, got to remind you again, begging you to go to metaxastalk.com, click on the CSI banner at the top of the page. We need your help desperately. Metaxastalk.com today. Please, thank you. Welcome back, talking to James Lindsay about this idea of the woke right and trying to clarify this so we know what we're talking about. So, the only names that you've given that anybody knows really are Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, but they have not attacked you. Let's put Candace out of the picture. But Tucker Carlson, he has had some provocative people on, but I don't see him as a chest thumping white Christian nationalist.
No, I don't think he is. I mean, he plays a neat game. He did lure Matt Walsh into saying that he was a Christian nationalist on his show and kind of had his little grin. But he did. He's invited several of these chest thumping Christian nationalists on his show. Andrew Isker, for example, who goes by Boniface Option, who's articulated a very radical vision for a pro Christian kind of theocracy, who's running something like a commune in Western Tennessee right now. So Andrew Isker was on his show recently. Andrew Isker left Tucker Carlson's show. I'm not positive whether or not they even changed clothes. They sat down together with another fellow named C.J. Engel, who is another one of these Christian nationalists, and they talked about how Christians need to embrace lying and Machiavelli in the name of obtaining power. This is on tape. They said this. So that was fresh off of his appearance from Tucker Carlson. He talks about the need for Christians to embrace lying and Machiavellianism in order to obtain power for this Christian
Okay.
nationalist vision.
Okay.
He's platformed, had a very softball interview 3 years ago with a wealthy man named Charles Haywood, who is pretty close to outright a fascist. He's openly a Francoist, and he gave this incredibly weird interview. This is Tucker I'm talking about with Charles, where he went through his manifesto and would ask him interesting questions about it without ever touching the truly radical, freaky parts, which he must have read because he talked about, say, the paragraph before the freaky part, but he didn't get into the part where men and women will be required by law, for example, to have very strict sex roles and can be heavily punished for not adopting them. He didn't talk about how he said there'll be a Christian nation, but Charles Haywood doesn't care if anybody's actually Christian as long as they pretend and are forced to pretend by the state, which doesn't sound very Christian to me. He
Okay.
talked about about
See,
his reviews of the Spanish Civil War
yeah,
without ever mentioning, by the way, you support Franco. And so, yeah,
right.
Tucker Carlson's been pushing these fellows for a while.
Yeah. Well, see, now what this confirms to me, I would argue, and again, folks, you have to be careful. The devil is cunning, uh, crafty. So what does he do? Twists words. Christian nationalism. There are days or ways in which I could completely agree with that, and there are more ways in which I could say it is right. It is of the devil. It is a term created by the devil. And this is what happens, right? These terms get thrown out there. No one really knows what it means. So I hear well meaning people say, well, I'm a Christian nationalist. Otherwise, what would I be? An atheist globalist? Uh, it's like, no, no, no. You see, you've been played because it's kind of like the Christ is king controversy. Like the question is, what do you mean by that? If I say Christ is king, praise the Lord, that's different than saying Christ is king, parentheses, USOB, understood. Clearly, the spirit behind it, what's actually meant behind it, is what matters. And so that's kind of at the heart of what we're talking about here, because there are people that they sound like they're on our side. But if you push a little bit or you probe a little bit, you find out what James is saying, that they are, in fact, representing the devil on the other side. They're just wearing different clothing. And so, I mean, this is very important to me, James, because I mean, I've written about this stuff. I wrote a book called "If You Can Keep It" about America, and what is at the heart of America, it seems to me, is that this is God's idea of liberty, of religious liberty. What we're talking about, whether on the woke left or on the woke right that you're talking about, is a kind of tribalist, triumphalist attitude, completely at odds with the spirit of liberty, which I believe is biblical, which I believe is God's idea. And so there are people on the right, who, I mean, actually Hitler was just like this, right? Like, what did Hitler do in the beginning? Before he talks about murdering the Jews, he's talking about degenerate art. He's talking about we should be proud to be Germans. I mean, most decent Germans would have agreed and said, yes, we have moral rot. We have this, we have that. So you agree and agree and agree, not knowing that you're riding on the back of a tiger, that you have allied yourself with something evil. So this tribalism that you're talking about, this kind of like, I'm proud to be white. So and forgive me for talking so much, but I just want to clarify because this is so fascinating to me. It's kind of like somebody saying, black people are better than white people. And you say, I'm offended by that. I'm proud to be white. In fact, I'm going to form a group that says proud to be white. Now you've kind of edged into this tribalist white thing, which is of the devil. And there are plenty of people on the right that have been duped into this. And that's kind of part of what you're talking about, it seems to me.
It's actually the goal of the left is to get people on the right to do one of two things. They want everybody to adopt a racial consciousness. They want some white people to adopt a self-guilty one, and they want other white people to adopt a self-proud one so that they can have the racial conflict. Because Marx laid out very clearly on the first page of the Communist Manifesto that the entire point is that all of history moves through the conflict of contending classes. And it ends in one of two ways, either by a revolutionary reconstitution of society or in the common ruin of the contending classes. So they want the fight. So they need right-wingers to pick up I'm white and I'm proud of it, and you're black and you're proud of it, and now we both hate each other over race. They need the conflict,
Okay.
and
Okay.
this
This
is
this is
happening.
brilliant. No, no, no. This is where we've really gotten somewhere here. So, folks, do you hear this, right? In other words, the idea is that if all of the lunacy around BLM and critical race theory can drive you to sort of hate blacks a little bit and to say, yeah, I'm really proud to be white, you have now bought into the demonic lie. You seem like you're on the opposite side of it, but actually you're partaking of it because God wants us to love everyone, not to see through the lens of race. Woke people want you to see through the lens of race. James has just said some of them want you, if you're white, to be loaded with white guilt for being white. But the devil is just as happy if you're incredibly proud of being white and you identify as super white and you kind of think that's a good thing. It is an evil thing. We'll be right back talking to James Lindsay. I'm going to remind you, we need you to go to metaxastalk.com. You, if you're listening, you need you to go to metaxastalk.com, click on the banner. By the grace of God, we are freeing slaves. The banner's at the top of the page, metaxastalk.com. It's a great cause. I can't think of a greater one. Please be a part of this solution, metaxastalk.com at the top of the page. Welcome back. We're talking to James Lindsay. James, this is so important, everything you're saying. So you're saying that there are people like Tucker Carlson who have now. What's interesting is Tucker kind of plays with this, or he platforms people, so to speak, who are kind of guilty of this. I would not see Tucker Carlson himself. I love Tucker. I know Tucker. He is not, a white nationalist, ultra MAGA, screw the libs kind of thing. He is a good guy. He's for common sense. But by platforming some of these people, I guess he's given them credibility. Is that the idea?
Well, another woke hallmark is the preference for marginalized or outsider knowledge in place of established knowledge. So again, we touch the truth. We all know that for the last 5 years, we just got lied to by all of our institutions, probably a lot longer than 5 years, actually, probably most of the last 50 years. We all are starting to wake up and realize that we have been lied to. We got lied to about COVID. We got lied to about Trump. We got lied to and lied to and lied to. You name it, we got lied to about it. They created derangement syndromes. They've driven people crazy with these psychological operations like Trump derangement and COVID. We know this is the case. So our institutions are in rot. We know they're. I've hoaxed the academy 7 years ago, as we've talked about in the past, and showed that our universities are in disrepair and in rot. So how are we supposed to trust the institutions, right? Well, the idea is that the woke belief is that the center of knowledge generation and communication is intrinsically corrupt for the regime, for this husk of a illegitimate regime that's maintaining itself for the benefit of the people who are ensconced within it, and that the people that are pushed out to the margins, the marginalized other ways of knowing, are actually more legitimate and have to be brought into the center, while that which is in the center now has to be displaced. This is why I say Tucker Carlson engages in wokery. And the reason is because his just asking questions, they're not letting us talk about this while he talks about it on a gigantic show. Nobody's allowed to say what's going on with this or that. And it's not just Israel, it's a lot of things. The mentality that the marginalized outsider, other ways of knowing are intrinsically superior to the established knowledge because the established knowledge must be corrupt in suppressing the truth
Okay.
is a
Okay.
woke
Now, this is
hallmark.
what I want to say. So I want again to clarify. So, ladies and gentlemen, if I can translate, because I want everyone to get this, because I've experienced this, right? Most of that is true, or enough of that is true. Here's the problem, folks. Do you understand? The devil doesn't get you to swallow a big lie. So he'll give you a lot of truth and then he'll mix in the poison pill lie. For example, all of our corruptions have been, all of our institutions have been corrupt. Pretty true. We've been lied to, and on and on and on. Who do I trust? Who killed the Kennedys? Who killed? So suddenly you wake up to that you've been lied to, that the mainstream media has lied, and on and on and on, all of which is true. But then you take it one step further, one fatal step further, and say, we never went to the moon. The earth is flat. The Jews are behind all of this. Hillary Clinton is a lizard person. Hillary Clinton was killed at Gitmo. There are two Joe Bidens. There are two Joe Bidens. There's a body double. All of this stuff is out there. And we just got seconds left, James. But is that anything there that I'm getting wrong?
Yeah, you've got the right idea. The thing that they actually push for there instead is that there is a socio-political order that excludes fascists from the center of power at the end of the day. And it is
Well,
biblical what you just said. Satan
I,
tempts Jesus in the desert in Matthew 4 and says, all this can be yours. And of course, Jesus replies, my kingdom's not of this world, but Jesus also already knows it's already all his. So the truth is, this can all be yours. That's true. But Jesus knows that it's actually a lie because he's Jesus and rejects
yes.
Satan.
Okay, okay, we're gonna get back to this when we come back, folks. This is important stuff. Don't go away. Hey there, folks. We're talking to James Lindsay about some important stuff. We're talking about his concept of the woke right. Okay, so James, the question is, where do you draw the line, right? In other words, when you talk about the post-war, I mean, one group is these tribalist white nationalist jackasses who they're all about. It's kind of like the guy in Norway who killed what 60, I don't know what it was, and he writes this kind of racialist tribalist manifesto, and they say he's a right wing and better. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're murdering people, let me just say that's not a MAGA value. I don't think George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or Donald Trump or Eric Metaxas would be with you on that, right? So there are people on the right who see things, in this case, through a racial lens. They want to murder the other. What is that? Radical Muslims, blacks, Jews. I don't know what it is. But the point is, we all know that that is equally evil to the lunatics on the left, to the Cultural Revolution under Mao. We know that that's evil, radically different in some ways, but actually exactly the same thing. Then there's this other group that you're talking about, James Lindsay, who they say the whole post-war liberal consensus is wrong. Now, and they were talking about the neocons, whatever. Now, isn't that basically true? In other words, when I think of George Bush Sr., um, I don't, at this point, I don't think of him as radically different from Michael Dukakis or whoever he was running against. I think of him as part of this uniparty that has been running things. When I think of Condi Rice, when I think of Colin Powell, when I think of Gerald Ford, I do not think of these people anymore as on the right side of history. They were just kind of going along with whatever it was. And I realized, wait a minute, thanks to Donald Trump, by the grace of God, I say, wait a minute, I'm not on board with the Iraq War and all that kind of stuff. So there's truth to the idea that the post-war liberal consensus has a lot wrong.
Yeah, well, radicals or Lucifer always marry truth to lie. They don't just lie, they marry a truth to a lie. So this is actually true. And in fact, I agree with everything you just said about, say, Bush Sr., even Bush Jr. And in fact, go further. I don't think they were just going along with it. I think they were complicit. So obviously, here I am espousing a view that people might say, well, James sounds like he's woke right. He knows that the neocons really did kind of lock power in themselves. But we have the example, for just to raise a couple, of Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan, who very clearly articulated a American conservatism that is nothing like the radicalism that we see. So the where we draw the line is at the radicalism, and where we have to look for that line is in these distortions, which are hard to see because they talk about true things falsely, right? They tell the truth wrongly. And so they tell you certain facts. This actually has a weird name. It's called paltering, which is to tell true things in order to mislead somebody. But they tell true things in order to get you to buy a radical line. And in this case, the radical line is that there is a true, very radical right that was represented by things like the John Birch Society and fascism and so on, that was excluded by Bill Buckley for the neocons in order specifically to allow the left to win. And Bill Buckley certainly did push out the radicals in the 1960s when he made the National Review. This is absolutely the case. He did push them out. But the point was that he wanted to defeat communism and also prevent fascism from taking root as a reaction to it. His point wasn't to get rid of true conservatives. His point was, in fact, to empower true conservatives. And I remind you, now that they're taking a mask off, at least online and in their videos, they're telling us, this woke right that they are not conservative in the first place. They are radical right-wing revolutionaries. That is a direct quote. So that's what they see themselves as. So we have to draw the line at radicals and revolutionaries who want to overthrow the system in such a way that it gives them the power, not just over the circumstances, over the country, but over conservatism itself. They're going to be the ones who set what it means to be on the right and not on the right. And if you're not towing their line, they will throw you out unceremoniously or cancel you or treat you terribly. And that's where you can see the intolerance and the radicalism that distinguishes conservatism from a radical right-wing revolutionary, which is something different. And that's where we have to draw the line.
Okay, and this is kind of like my friend and frequent guest on the program, John Zmirak, talks about Catholic integrationalists. It's a kind of similar thing. It's a little bit like Christian Sharia. It's what the left rightly fears in the right. In other words, when they say, oh, you just want a theocracy, you just want to take over. Now, a true Christian and a true American patriot would say, absolutely not. I'm as much against that as you are. I believe in religious liberty. I believe in the founding principles. I don't believe in Christians taking over any more than I believe in Sharia law would be a good thing. Um, so, but there are people, and again, this stuff is nuanced, folks. So this is what's so tricky about it. Because I often talk about we need to take back our institutions, and I use my friend Lance Woolnow's, the Seven Mountains. We need to take back the media and da 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 da. Now, the way I mean it is very different than the way uh, I guess a genuine Christian nationalist would mean it. He would mean we need to do anything we can to take those things over. And I would say, well, no, you can't do anything you can. You have to use the law. You have to use we the people vote. We get to vote. We have to follow the Constitution. Like we have rules about how we accomplish things, the right way to accomplish things. I'm not willing to murder, to get my way. But you're talking about people who say, look, this is the kind of war where we need to do anything to win power. So they are like the woke left. They worship ultimately, this is what I believe God sees. They worship power. They do not worship truth. Their view of truth is so distorted that they do not worship truth. They worship an idol of power. So that to me is at the heart of what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree. They've taken on the leftist assumption that truth is contingent. In other words, that truth is just a matter of your perspective and your awakening. And this, I think, is completely a demonic view. The truth is that which is in correspondence to reality. Moral truth is that which is in correspondence to goodness, which is, of course, perfectly represented in God. And these things are not really, there are some difficult debates within ethics and so on, but these are not particularly debatable concepts. There is no your truth and my truth, you're right and you're wrong. There is actually, the fact of the matter is that there is right and wrong, and there is good and evil, and there is true and false. And it's not a matter of, how many followers you can get on social media to agree with you, or how much reach you have on your YouTube account, or how many people that you can get to defend you when you say something stupid. It actually comes down to something much more fundamental than that, and we have to remember that.
Well, I know we're just about out of time, which brings us, of course, to the Jews. Why is it that the people on what you're calling the woke right kind of feel, whether they actually say it or not, like sort of the Jews are behind it? I mean, Daryl Cooper, when he's talking about, yeah, Hitler was bad, but somehow it's kind of like the Jews and the neocons, who are sort of the same, have created this narrative. Isn't that seems to me how I know this point of view is evil? Because when you go after the Jews, you're going after God's chosen people, and you're almost tipping yourself off as working with the devil.
Well, I think there's a handful of reasons not to get too deep into it, but that are pretty simple on the surface. Number one is it's extremely divisive. So if you're trying to build a splinter movement, you can splinter people off on this extremely divisive issue. So it's very powerful as a wedge that they can drive into the existing movement. So that's a very politically strategic thing. Secondly, anti-Semitism is the mother of all conspiracy theories in essence. So basically, every conspiracy theory kind of mimics the shape of anti-Semitism. There's a small, powerful group that controls everything that they refuse to assimilate, and they have bad intentions. And so it all kind of channels back. This is like the mother of conspiratorial thinking is anti-Semitism. Critical race theory is modeled after anti-Semitism exactly, but it blames whites instead of Jews. And then kind of
Okay,
third,
hang on. We're gonna be right back, folks. Remember, metaxastalk.com. At the top of the page is the banner. You got to do it. I don't care what you do, just do it. Metaxastalk.com, top of the page.